Good morning.
Hey, how are you?
Good.
Good. I'm just getting up to the live stream here, so we'll be streaming momentarily.
Awesome. Good morning.
There it is. Perfect. Apparently, I don't know what I'm doing anymore, so sorry about this. Why is this not doing what I want it to do? There we go. Okay. Okay, I believe that we're working and things are good. I'm going to close the door a little bit, and we can get started in just a moment.
Excellent.
The agenda to you this morning. This is a quick update with the link to access this meeting, so it should be at the top of your email. And it's fairly basic and it remains relatively the same, but we will get to that.
Okay. So, it is 12:03 p.m. on Thursday, May 15th. We'll call this meeting to order. The Cultural Vitality Committee, meeting on the Arts and Culture Assistance Program. And I do acknowledge with respect that we are in Robinson Huron Treaty Territory. That the land on which we are gathered is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and known as Wawating. Wawating is home to the Garden River First Nation, Batchewana First Nation, and the historic Sault Ste. Marie Navy Council. Does anyone have declarations of pecuniary interest for today? Seeing none, we will need our agenda to be adopted. So looking for someone to move and second adoption of today's agenda. Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Miranda. Any additions or changes? Seeing none, all in favor? That is carried. All right. So we're here today to review the Arts and Culture Assistance Program in terms of the guidelines, the process, the timeline, the application form. And with the goal of updating the program with addressing some of the issues that have been shared in the past by members of our committee. In order that we can have it in place for, remind me, Alicia, come on in. We want to have it, oh, I know, we want to have it in place before the fall intake. So that any changes that we decide to make are put in place prior to that. And there's Alicia can describe the process that has to go through. I believe that we have to share any recommended changes with council for council to approve. And we need some timeline to do that, but the goal is to get this finished during the next, by the end of June roughly.
Yeah.
Correct? So we have about 6 weeks or so to work our way through this. So that we can meet the required timelines for any changes. Anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that's everything. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so how you want to go through this by those 4 different sections, is that correct, Alicia? With starting with the guidelines,
Yes,
and then, okay,
I think everything else kind of follows suit once we determine how we want to keep the program structured or how we want to make changes from here. In terms of the application, that's something that doesn't go through to council for review, so that's something that we can review after the fact.
okay,
Or after we determine what this will look like. The timeline, that's something that we'll want to talk about. And if I think we've already kind of covered the process review with respect to the outside agencies and how they'll have to play into this and be covered under the same umbrella, but not necessarily be relevant to what we're talking about today. So I think we're okay.
okay, so is the best way to do this to go through the document? We have a 14-page document that starts off with the guidelines. And then takes us through these various different sections in terms of the process and so on. Is that the most efficient way to go through this?
I think so, unless so I guess the real question becomes, do we want to scrap the program as it currently is in its entirety? Or do we want to not stick to the guidelines, but kind of maintain a semblance of this program as it currently stands? And that's, I guess, the best way to figure out what we're doing here. Because if we can review the guidelines, I have a few different versions of documents that we've been marking up over the years and what should go and change. But if we want it to be entirely different, then we need to start there, I think. I saw Lee shake her head.
Go ahead, Lee.
Okay, I think that overall there's a lot of good meat in the guidelines, so I would hesitate to throw the baby out with the bathwater. As they say, I think there will be some broad sweeping changes based off of what we discussed at our last meeting, but I think that I know that when I was going through the guidelines, I know it felt like when I was doing track changes and adding comments and that it was big changes, but really I didn't actually have to edit the content of everything all that much when I was providing updates. So I don't think we need to start from scratch, is my personal opinion.
Brenda, do you want to weigh in on that?
I feel similarly. I think between the work that's been done in the past and the work that's been done more recently, to take a close look and make suggestions about what to keep and what to cut, I think that there is a lot of good in there. I think we just need to make things more succinct and streamlined, more user-friendly for everybody involved.
I'm certainly cool with that. I don't think we need to start over. So if that gets us to, we're gonna go through this and we will refer to are you okay with that?
Yeah,
We'll refer to our notes in the various different sections as we go through the guidelines. Is that right? So do you want to lead this or do you want me to lead this? How would you like to?
I think that'd be okay, and I'll be asking for input throughout. I don't expect everybody to have comments on every section.
Okay.
The way that I've gone through this, and I've incorporated some notes that Miranda had provided last year from the last iteration of the subcommittee as well, so this is kind of comprehensive. And if there's anything that's not quite right or that I've missed or misinterpreted, Miranda, please let me know as I represent the information. If I guess just out of curiosity, I'm so sorry because I know that I sent it in a Word document last week, but if for some reason you're looking for the ACAP guidelines as they currently are, it's on saultestmarie.ca/ACAP, ACAP, and we're looking at the guideline document, right? In case you need to access that quickly and pull it up and you want to see exactly what I'm saying. Looking at this, I hate to say it, but I'd really like to remove the introduction. I'm just gonna start slashing. And we can talk about what needs to stay and what needs to go. But for the relevance of this document, I don't really think that we need the introduction in its current entirety. I think it's important that it mentions the community cultural plan, but as we're kind of out of date on that as well and looking to move forward with something else, I don't know if at this moment in time, this document needs to reference that plan. So I would like to remove this version of the introduction. If nothing else, maybe a small, this document does this, it'd be enough for the scope. Looking into program priorities.
Can we
sorry.
just stop for a second?
Yep.
If we go through this a bit at a time and have our make our comments as we go, then we don't get too far ahead of ourselves, I think.
Okay.
Am I understanding you to say you don't want to reference the existing, even though it's out of date cultural plan in this at all, or?
I don't think I want to mention it here in the beginning. I don't think it's relevant to have this piece of text here. I was going to say that it's you know, there's a lot of verbiage here. So if we're looking at the second last sentence, the city's community development and enterprise services department is coordinating the grant application process. Well, that information is included as to how to submit later on. It's housed on our website. Some of these things are implied. I think that this document was initially conceived of as a bit of a piece of information that was supposed to go to council. I don't know that it was ever, like, I'm sure it was supposed to be posted this way, but I'm not sure it was ever intended for the audience that it's going towards in its current state. I think there's relevance. So for example, if you look under program priorities underneath, it references the community cultural plan. Again, we could just hyperlink that one, that reference there. So for me, the top half is just verbiage that doesn't need to be there, and it just kind of confuses people.
Maybe this section could be kind of pulled together so that it's introduction and overview of program priorities and made more succinct.
For sure.
I think we have to, I think in all of these, in the way that we're thinking here, I think we have to pretend like we are a person looking at this for the very first time. We know this like the back of our hand because we've been right. So I think we need to put ourselves in the position of someone or an organization or whatever that says, oh, I heard about this thing, they got money there, maybe we should check it out and see if we might qualify for something, right? And so a little bit of background I think is helpful. We will have a new plan, hopefully within the next year. But just keep that in mind. I think we all need to keep that in mind, that what someone reads for the very first time might need a little more.
Yes.
So however we might take those comments forward, which is what Miranda said, which is maybe, simplify a little, but don't be afraid to present. I think having been at this table for about 10 years now, in some way, shape, or form, I think it's very significant for and it's in a way it's a bit shameful. However, it is significant. The very first time this city ever had a cultural plan was started in 2019. The very first time. Okay. And I think it's significant to recognize that and to just to give that background to people who may be looking at this for the first time. Miranda.
I agree with you. I also look at the guidelines as somebody who writes grants all the time, and as somebody who's often running people through their first times writing grants. And I feel like we need to strike that balance between providing enough information and not overwhelming people with information so that it feels like it's heavy and inaccessible as a process.
Okay, so you're gonna take these thoughts and
Yes.
I know you're gonna rework as we go along here, so
Yes.
we're now in the priorities section, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
What I'm hearing from this, sorry, when we were talking, I was also looking up the Green Initiatives Fund to see how they have dealt with theirs. I couldn't remember what their form looked like. And there it all seems to be one package that I can find. But they have their purpose, they have their fund overview. This is not the same, these guidelines, they don't function the same way. Anyway, we'll get back to them in a minute. But yeah, so we have a process form. This is what's happening. This is the purpose, the policy, the definitions, the things that it responds to. In terms of, the problem that we always have with this, and we've said it time and again, is that it's a document for council and for the website. It has an overview of the program, but it's also supposed to be a working document for people to access the funds. Those two things don't always go together. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you, I'm sure these Lee and Miranda would say the same thing, and I know you've written grants in the past before, Alicia. When I'm writing grants, I personally, I'm a bit old school, I actually have a printed copy of this, whatever it is I'm working on, right in front of me.
Yes.
Okay, and I bet you I read it 100 times, right? I keep going back to it because the goal is for any grant we write is for us to the best we can align what we're asking for to what the guidelines or the plan or the vision or the goals or whatever it is are, right?
Yes.
So it's this vision, it's this guiding thing that mine usually has coffee on it by the end and all, and all of that. Anyways, so we're in the priorities.
Yes. I think I agree with you. I know what you're saying. Looking at this, I'm looking at the priorities and I don't love how they're spelled out here. I think as an overview document, it's fine, but because we talked specifically about different areas within the project grants, I think it's hard to go back and forth on the document. So just in terms of a readability, I would love to know, I don't want to list the program priorities under every single area, but I would like to know better how these meet, like what's being looked at under which project stream, so to speak. I know that they're all a priority, but we're given these priorities and then we're given the must-haves under each of these, and I find that confusing. If that makes sense.
Any Lee?
Yes, I would agree. I really felt that there was a lot of repetition and redundancy in this document that made it way longer and way more confusing than was necessary. So I think if we need to outline from like an introduction and program priorities standpoint, like 3 or 4 macro points, and then have specific requests under each of the types of streams that we're talking about, that would make more sense. But it's like, okay, so you have the program priorities, and then down here you have, okay, now we're into operational, but now there's multiple types of operational. Each type of those operational have their own sets of priorities as well. That becomes a lot to unpack. So now you're trying to go up the tree, and now it's like 27 points you're trying to integrate into your application, which seems like overkill, which is why we're getting 100-page applications.
I want to jump in and agree with you. And then when we ask people to cross-reference the community cultural plan, where some of these priorities aren't spelled out quite the same way, but they do exist within, it makes it additionally confusing. So I think we have too many priorities,
Miranda?
but not.
I think that it can also get to be a lot of information for anybody adjudicating the applications too, because we're cross-referencing several sections, and it's very easy to get confused or even lost in the document that way. So if there's a way of making things more succinct, it'll make it user-friendly for all.
My thoughts on this are a little different. And I think that might be the word priority that's causing the issue here. Because these really are not priorities, okay, in the true sense of that term. What they are is, and I've written down different words here, is they're either vision or mission or goals or some combination there of those terms. It's like there's no marker here, but when I think but I think visually, but I can't right now because it's here we go.
That's fine.
So and you guys can't see this, but I think I'm just thinking visually in that, and it's almost it's not, I don't want to use the word backward. If you look at the flow of, because all of this leads to an application, right? So we're looking, we're looking to have an application flow into a section that meets a set of objectives, because they're called objectives, right? In there, right? And then those objectives flow into that list of things at the very beginning, right? Like that's the overall mission. That's what we're trying to accomplish in this community. Promote cultural vitality over there in the end, right? That's the mission of the city. Oh, great. And so it's like, how do you, like, visually, this is how I'm thinking of it. Like visually, how do all those things get connected? So I think those things are important. I just think it's the word that might be causing the challenge. Lee.
Well, I'm thinking exactly like you, and I'm also visual. You could tell by my tree. I have a radical thought, and it would hyper simplify all of our objectives, priorities, whatever we want to call them. Why not just take our rubric, which is how we're grading all of these anyway? We're talking about adding that 4th category for cultural diversity. Why would we not just take a consolidated rubric? Your program priorities are your 4 categories. That's how we're grading these. Those are the objectives we're trying to meet. And then the individual criterion within those categories could then be the subpoints within those objectives, like how we're meeting essentially the cultural plan, because that's how we're grading them anyway. And then within the specific streams, essentially we could have those exclusion criteria or those additional criterion that we were talking about, like being an incorporated nonprofit, if you want operational funding, like those types of things. And that would really essentially remove 90% of the wasted air in verbiage in a lot of these. Because we're just getting to the point we're rewording how we're already grading these things and what we're already looking for in a way that works for the applicants, and that's it. Just radical thought. It hopefully would not throw the baby out with the bathwater, but as I saw Donna like building everything in the flow, I'm like, yeah, we have that already. It's our rubric. So I kind of, yeah.
Yeah, I personally don't see it that way. I think the rubric is different than what these things are. Like, these are measurements. These points here in this section, they are how we measure success. Okay, they're how we measure success. And it's important for the community. It's important to make these kinds of statements. It's important for the leadership here to understand, and it's important for people who are considering applying or who make application to understand the big picture. These bullets are the big picture. Before this cultural plan came out, and I'm sorry to rehash this, but it's been 10 years of my life I've invested in this. We didn't talk about how arts and culture was a value to the economy in this city. We did not talk about these things, okay? And therefore we didn't fund them because we didn't prioritize them. And I think that while it might be a lot of words, or it might be words that we don't think are relevant to the application itself, because it's the application we want to be simpler, right? It's the way that a person connects to the information to help them be successful. But these statements, these are the guiding principles. These are the principles for our priorities, goals, mission, vision. I don't know what the right word is, but that's what we're trying to accomplish in the broader sense with our cultural vitality plan. And the arts and culture assistance program is one part of that. So I just encourage us all to keep our head in the big picture, as well as the nitty gritty of how we tell people what they can apply for and how they do it. Okay, because there is a big picture to this.
That's very fair. And I think I do take for advantage of, like, obviously, shouldn't everyone know this, right? Being in the thick of it. And if we still need to paint that picture, then definitely. I just think probably within the specific program objectives, then maybe is where I'm thinking my notes might belong, just to minimize that, because that's also a transparency thing, right? Is to showcase exactly how we're grading these applications.
Right, and I'm gonna go back, just so you know, I'm gonna go back and I'm going to review this meeting just to make sure I didn't miss anything. As I'm thinking and I'm working at the same time. I'm looking here at the program priorities, but I'm looking at, if we're looking at the individual artist application form, pages 3 and 4. One of the questions here is question 6. How does this activity, project, or event support the current community culture plan? Please select all the community program and impact priorities that the project supports. Then it lists them all, and then we ask them to explain those that are selected. I think that this information maybe just it belongs here, but not right here, I guess is my point. So it's already here in the application. To be fair, I think I don't love this question on the application, because I think it ties people up a little bit and it causes some concern, but that's a different problem for a different conversation when we review the application form. I just don't know if it just needs to be here at the start of this project. Like it does and it doesn't. I don't know.
Pretend you're reading it for the first time. Just pretend you're a person who has never seen this before. Okay. Just try and put yourself in that zone, because that's who we need to spell this out for.
As a person, it's like from a communications perspective, and that's typically where I operate from. If I'm reading through this for the first time, I'm skimming the front page and I'm looking for the information that I think is relevant to me. I might come back to it after I've said, oh, I want $20,000 in a large project grant. I might go back, but then we're having an issue of back and forth. So it's fine, but from a perspective of people who are literally flipping pages or maybe actually don't have the capacity to print it out. That's more my issue is formatting. It's not so much the content, so much as I just don't want it here. So
Well, we've had that,
Yeah.
we've gone through that, so let's keep going, because otherwise we're
Yes.
not gonna get past the first page.
yes,
But
yes, we'll keep going.
So we've got our thoughts there. We're into the general notes section here
Mm-hmm.
now. Any comments on that? Oh, sorry, Lee.
That's okay. I sometimes there's a lag and I don't want to interrupt anyone. The only note I had on that was adding a point of incomplete applications will not be eligible for review. I'm sorry, but I will leave the ACAP review committee if I have to go through what I went through in this last intake. Like it was way too much, and it was so much chat GPT, and it was incomplete, and I'm searching backup documents. It was just messy.
I don't want to take us down a rabbit hole because we've spoken a little bit about AI in the past, but do we want to start running these through some sort of an AI checker, and will that matter to the committee, or is that something about accessibility that we don't want to touch?
Yeah, I don't think that's what we're here for right now. I think that's a whole different conversation.
Mm.
I think that a streamlined application where every single, cause I did notice that in some cases, the applications the supporting documents were not provided in the same format as was asked for, and some things like that, and so it just gets, like some people, I remember in the ones I read, some people typed out their budget, like in a Word document versus putting it in the format that we're used to seeing, and it was in a different order. Right, so there was it's just things like that when you're reading 34 of them, you're just trying to say, oh, is this where they're telling me how much they're gonna spend and what they wanna spend it on? It just doesn't look like this part, right? So I think that's a different thing that has to do with the application in terms of the format, and
Right.
there's comments here somewhere about using some type of I forget where I read that, where did I see that? The intake system, some type of a software that forces people to, it's the same format for everyone, but then to Lee's point, yes, be very clear and upfront. If it's incomplete, we just say no, that full stop.
Okay.
Other thoughts on that, Miranda, from you?
Not at this time.
And it's very clear here. If you need help, or if you talk to us, because we're gonna, we're not just saying if it's incomplete, whatever.
Right.
We're saying here's a resource, we want you to be successful, but if you don't use us as a resource or whatever,
Yes.
and you send us something that's incomplete and it doesn't meet unfortunately, we're not able to.
Right.
Okay.
Submission dates. I'd like to move on there. I just take issue with how big this section is, and accessibility too. I'm fairly confident that we should not be having charts or tables in the documents for AODA compliance. But beyond that, I was going to say that I just don't love the way that we've written this. I would just like it to be more concise. Again, this is part of the conversation. Again, I don't want to take us down the rabbit hole, but are we happy with 2 intakes while we're talking about
Well,
this
I think
document?
that's the biggest issue.
Yeah.
I mean, personally, I don't care how you write this section, my opinion, it's just that information needs to be there.
Yep.
So if you think it's better from a AODA perspective and other things to make it more succinct, I think that's fine. But I think that's the big question we want to discuss here is, go ahead, Lee. The timing.
Exactly. You nailed it. I'm all for removing dual intakes, having one intake period, and it likely coinciding with a less busy time of year so that we can actually award the funds in April, which would work for projects in the spring, summer, or fall, which is when most projects take place.
If my memory serves me correctly, Miranda, didn't you say when we had this discussion at our last meeting that you had I think you mentioned about OAC, because I had brought up about timelines and you had said can you share whatever you were thinking that day?
I'll see if I can remember. in the context of guidelines and busier times or less busy times, I think I had mentioned, sorry, not guidelines, application deadlines. I feel like there are deadlines through the year, and depending on what different organizations are applying to as far as funders and their funding streams, there's always a busy time. So I think that we just need to choose deadlines and stick to them based on what works for the committee and the city process, and have applicants just plan to meet those deadlines. There has been discussion in the past about 1 versus 2 deadlines and intake periods. And on the one hand, I think that absolutely having 1 intake would make our process tidier and simpler in a lot of ways. I do think that there are the main advantage that I see to having 2 intakes is that if an applicant is declined at the first intake, they have an opportunity to apply at the second, which can make all the difference as far as making or breaking the success of different projects, especially if it's just a matter of simply refining a grant application, bringing it back to the committee, and that being enough to have it funded. But I can see the merits of both sides of this conversation.
If we were to move towards 1 intake, not just talking about this year we wouldn't really be shorting. My biggest concern is that we don't short anybody on their opportunity to apply. So at this point in time, we have a long enough timeline to be able to educate people with a new process and talk about timelines and what have you. If it didn't end at the end of October, would it be appropriate to, I guess the question is, when would it be appropriate to have an intake close? Because I know that my month leading up to that is typically information sessions and coaching and making sure documents are in place and working directly with people. And so I guess the question becomes, which month is the best for that? So in keeping with the beginning of the year. One more thought on that also, though, is that with the Cultural Vitality Committee, the terms tend to end December 31st. I think it's every 2 years. So with that in mind, what we ran into this year was the issue of we didn't technically have a committee for the first 15 days of January until council appointed us. And so we lost 2 weeks of valuable time where in theory, and we knew that some people would likely be returning, and they had potentially scored applications that then carried over to a new committee. So how do we avoid making sure that people aren't caught in the crosshairs of coming and going from the committee so there's consistency?
Go ahead, Lee.
Miranda actually had her digital hand up first, so I'll let her go first.
That's okay. I'm quite happy, guys. Like, don't worry about putting your hand. Like, just leave your mic open and
Okay.
pay attention to
I'll
who's talking
apologize in advance
and jump in and jump in.
Okay.
Just like we're all here in the same place but different.
Go ahead, Miranda.
I think the thing that you recalled me saying that I forgot to mention about different project grants having multiple deadlines. There are certain OAC project streams that do have 2 deadlines in a year. And I can't think of what they are off the top of my head. It would just require a little cursory examination of their streams. I think Northern Arts might be one of them. And I think some of the creation programs might also fall under that. As far as your question about the when of the deadline and how that overlaps with current workflows and the membership of the committee, what if we were to have, if we're going with 1 intake, what if it was to have a deadline of early April? I say that knowing that the turnaround time for applications at the OAC is usually 4 to 5 months, and that many of the Canada Council programs are now on an 8-month turnaround. So it takes 8 months from the time that you apply to the time that you hear back. But that gives ample time for the process to occur of adjudication. And if the intake was to happen in early April, it would give us 8 months before the end of the terms of committee members, which would probably give us a little bit more grace as far as seeing the process through from start to finish. Just a suggestion, just a thought.
Go ahead, Lee.
I said I was going to say that's an interesting one. I have another question. Maybe it's for Alicia, but I think we all probably have some way in here. and I don't want to just assume, but it seems like we're having trouble recruiting committee members, and specifically recruiting committee members that regularly attend meetings and participate in the actual ACAP review process. And I think making the deadline line up in a way that also is conducive to how we keep and retain these members. Like, I know, for example, last summer we didn't even meet, let alone try to set up review dates because vacations become difficult, and that sort of thing. So my gut is make the deadline end of January for either first round or for all, depending on what we opt to do. That would give us all of February and March to review. And then we could suggest to council winning applicants come April. So it's kind of the inverse of what you said in a way, Miranda, in that April's a key time, yes, but I'm thinking of it more like hand out the money in the key time. Because I'm thinking about, we only had 4 people reviewing some of these applications as it was, and that's problematic, I think.
Lee, I tend to agree with you, or at the end of January, just because in theory, it would give us, if we had new members, we could onboard them appropriately, ask them to be involved or what have you, and to get them up to speed and give us the time, like, and like someone had said, the grace, I guess, to the space and to be able to move forward and on a timeline that's not as intense as this one can be, that we're experiencing right now even. I know that what typically comes up right now, what we're not talking about a lot, but we will probably in the future, is us looking towards public art projects, and how the committee can be more involved in that. As we're looking towards the cultural plan, I think what we're looking at in the future is ongoing meetings, perhaps, I don't know, if twice a year or even quarterly, in terms of cultural forum type meetings. These types of things will take place throughout the year and keep us connected and keep us busy in addition to this. So for us, for right now, I'm sure that we're all feeling the same way, that we're this ACAP process in the 2 intakes, the way that it takes time to do it properly, it takes up the majority of the year. So without not giving it the attention that it needs, I kind of think the end of January might be right as well, but at the same time, I'm just happy to do what the committee wants to do. One way or another, honestly.
So couple things on this, from my perspective. I believe that Alicia might have to get just clarification. I might know the answer to this, but I may not. So in what Miranda described, I don't know if we're in a position to give out money in a calendar year for the following calendar year. Okay, and I think that I don't know if we're allowed to do that or not. So do you know?
I think that we currently do that. We can't allocate funds from next year's pot. We can allocate only these funds and know that they cover the first 4 months of next year. So there are many projects over time that there are projects that come in the second half of the year. For example, if someone provided an operations grant at this intake, their operations might take them until this time next.
Yeah, that's what, no, and that's not what I'm referring to. What I'm referring to is in the city's budget cycle, in the budget confirmation, so whatever happened in the end of December of 2024, it said, okay, arts and culture assistance program has 170,000 or whatever the amount of money is to give away in the calendar year of 2025. So I don't think in 2025, though, we can give away money for 2026. Like right?
No.
That's where I'm kind of going with this. It's not about how people use the money, it's about whether whereas in some grants, like Heritage, for example, okay, I applied for a grant in April of 2025, okay, for the Algoma Fall Festival. And it will be for the grant years 2026 and 2027.
Mm-hmm.
So they're like a year, and Miranda is nodding her head, right? They're a year ahead. And the rules within the federal government allow them to do that. They designate funds and they put them in a pot and they say, yes, we're going to allow this to happen, and we're going to give you a confirmation that you can give away this pot of money for over 2 years or whatever. I don't know that the city quite works in the same way, and we should just get clarification around that. Miranda?
Yeah, I'm nodding my head because I have questions about the term too. Um, are we giving out money for the following calendar year, or are we funding for the current calendar year and potentially retroactively funding applications? And I've seen it done both ways. I know that when you apply to the OAC, you can apply for projects that start before you hear back about your grant, but you run the risk that way of starting a project that doesn't get funded. I've also seen some funders say, you know, you're applying at this time for a project that won't start until the next calendar year. So we need clarification about what we're able to do. I think in the potential deadline that I suggested, I was thinking that we would have from April until December to adjudicate grants that aren't starting until the next calendar year, which means that the applicants get the money or should have the money by the beginning of January of the year that they're asking for the money in. As far as what Lee is suggesting, that opens up the potential for retroactive funding, which is not, you know, lots of funders do it, but we need to decide for us what is workable, and whether we want to leave applicants on the hook for starting projects that they may not get funding for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, those are all things that we just we should get clarified, so that we can have proper thoughts. The city's budget year is January to December, right? Whereas federal and provincial governments are April to March, right? So that's where, you know, it's a little bit different here,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So just so we know. So you've heard those thoughts. There is a question here, although I'm not so sure anymore that it applies, but I did make a comment the last time about multi-stage applications and whether that has a role here or not in people applying and then getting the, you know, it certainly is very beneficial on behalf of the applicant to spend less time, right? And getting, especially if it was a large project grant, like I'm not suggesting you would necessarily do that for a small project grant, but maybe certain types of grants that we could think about that. The other thing I thought about, we're obviously not going to make a decision today about this, is could there be, if it wasn't all one intake, is there any, I don't even know if it's a good idea, worth talking about, different intake for different programs. So if at a certain timeline was all the small project grants and then we did all the other grants at a different intake time, you know, I know that changes how the pot is split and things like that, but you know, there's pros and cons to everything that everybody's talking about here. 1 versus 2 versus splitting up the two types or whatever. Just that's for thinking about, for all of us to think about.
For sure. Going back to what you said earlier, I'm confident that what we're talking about in terms of the city budget allocations into 2026 and 2027. At this time, I'm confident because the budget hasn't been set for those years, that's not allowed. I'm happy to explore and see what we can do, if there is any flexibility there, if it's ever been asked about before. I don't think it has, that I'm aware of. It's really interesting. We're talking about retroactive and covering projects. If we were potentially to institute this in April or for April of next year for that time closing, are we shorting people in this funding cycle a little bit? Like and then from that point ever more, it would be consistent and fine, I think, if we kept it. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think,
Yeah,
there might be a 3-month period where there was no funding being provided, but I just went through our intake practices and technically, and I don't think I know I didn't exclude projects that didn't fit this criteria. We were supposed to only approve applications who have activities or whose fiscal year commences 3 months after that intake process. So technically, when we were reviewing our most recent applications, all of those applications should have had their activity start after July.
Yes.
Which I know was not the case in a lot of those applications.
April, May, June, right?
So I think that's interesting that we're talking about this, because I know that definitely got lost for me in the mix of all of these dates and intakes and charts. And I feel like if we just have one and we say after April 1st, then that's nice and clear. It's one date. we'll announce in April who gets it, and they have to have started their project in April, which means there won't be any retroactive. We kind of remove that from.
These are just all things I want to sleep on them personally. Like,
Yes.
I don't think we're not gonna make a decision on this today. I mean, there's a lot of things to think about.
This was really productive and really good. Do we want to keep moving?
Yeah. How long do we have, Miranda?
Before I lose it, I want to offer another pro of what you suggested, Donna, with splitting up the streams, splitting up the intakes. And it goes back to something that Lee said about not having very many committee members present for the deliberations. Some of that, like I know in my case, because Thinking Rock often applies for funding and I have to recuse myself from those competitions, means that I can't participate in the deliberations. But for example, if we are applying for operating funding, I could still participate in the deliberations around the small project funds and be active that way. So it opens up other possibilities for splitting the committee's participation and also having different folks involved at different intakes for those adjudications. It's a pro of that offer.
In support of that too. I like the idea of splitting intakes. I do think it leaves us in a bit of a perpetual state of ACAP. But that's not a problem if the month before isn't entirely filled with meetings. So for example, if we're talking about different grant streams at different times of the year, that's fine to support that, because reasonably speaking, we're getting maybe 10 applications per grant stream if we fine tune the grant streams a bit, which is not the same as serving or trying to support 30 plus applicants and those who didn't apply all in the same month while trying to move other activities along. Because that makes work kind of come to a bit of a standstill internally as well.
What it might mean if we were to go down that road, what it might mean is that where it gets complicated is in the dollars, right? And so what it might mean is we'd have to say, we are going to make a pot of X dollars for small project grants, right? And it's going to be X dollars. I don't want to say a number because I don't want to freak anybody out, but it's like, X% of the pot or X dollars of the pot or whatever. And that's what we're dealing with. And it is, you're dividing up that $170,000 towards different streams. May or may not be a good idea. I don't know, but I think we'd have to do something like that in order to accommodate it. Go ahead, Miranda.
And that could be informed by what we have seen as far as percentages of the pot requested by different streams at different times. So we could actually go into that making an informed call about what those pots would be based on past experience.
Yes. And I have that information actually. The biggest concern is because we've been allowing stacking of streams to this point is that I think it was when I last looked before this most recent early intake, it was something like 38% of the applications that have been approved that were stacked that came from multiple streams, which makes it a little more complicated. But to look at the picture overall, we could probably divide that out. We could probably look at the data. Love it. Yes.
Go ahead, Lee.
Me and Miranda are like, we have feelings.
No stacking.
No stacking.
Yeah,
no stacking. No stacking.
I think we're all aligned on that. I think we all agree. Like that's a comment from before. I think we can just take that off the list, that we don't have to talk about that.
Yes.
I think we all agree, and we would recommend to the rest of the group, you apply in one section or another, full stop.
Yep. That's great.
Right. And I also think, to take that one step further, if this is going to help us, I also think, but please tell me if I'm wrong, that we are aligned on removing the cultural diversity stream and putting that into the rubric, either in its own section or as part of one of the other sections, whether it's the cultural vibrancy or whatever, and making it a rubric measurement as opposed to its own channel, right? Am I right about that? Lee's nodding, but Miranda is not yet. Or
I think that makes sense.
okay.
Excellent.
Okay. So now, how long do we have?
We can keep firing through this.
It's them I'm worried about. How long do you guys have?
I don't have any hard stops today.
Okay, so
except when it comes to stacking.
So we could for sure go to 1:15. What about you?
I'm good till 1:30.
Okay,
Yep.
so let's see where we can get by 1:15 to give Alicia time to get back to her office. So we are now at we've ticked a couple of things off the list further down, which by what we just saw, but now we're on page 3, I think, and we're in project grants themselves, this is where now the different categories are listed, which is small project grants, large project grants, operating grants.
Okay, so I'm not gonna try and expedite this too hard because I think, because I think a lot of this it'll make sense in a minute. Looking at the grant types and eligibility, I would like there to be 2 official project streams, or sorry, grant streams, projects and operational. Maybe, so small, sorry, and events, essentially events. So small, large projects under the same relative thing with some caveats, operational, and then events. Whether they be festival or events or what have you. But again, we've already talked about taking out cultural diversity, so that kind of makes things better. Miranda's got her hand up, maybe.
I was just thinking, I think that personally, I see small projects, large projects, and operational as being the 3 that I would keep, because I think that festivals and events could fit under large project grants. Lee's giving a thumbs up. What do you 2 in the Thompson room think about that radical idea?
Thoughts? I agree.
I'm reading the criteria, or the objectives, that's why I'm.
That's
pausing.
okay.
Go ahead.
So again, going back to the conversation about priorities on the first page, and then now we have the objectives here, but then we also have what the applicant must do under each of these, like again, 3 pieces. So in terms of I just want to tighten this up, and we can talk about that later. I don't think it's really removing anything that shouldn't be there. It doesn't really change these in any significant way, so much as the document's more legible. But looking at this, I don't hate large projects being festivals, events falling under large projects, but I would like to see festivals and events actually fall under it. You might have everybody here might have some different ideas based on their backgrounds, but I don't know that festivals should be eligible for operations funding if they don't provide operations throughout the year, if it's just a one-time period, and that's a conversation open for discussion. Maybe I'm looking at this with too narrow a lens, I'm not sure. And Miranda raised her hand.
So I think the way around that might be that if a festival or an event does want to apply for operational funding, that's the stream that they apply to, as opposed to a large project grant. While on that topic, I would just say that the operational grants, I think that there had maybe been some discussion about people or groups not being able to apply for those on an annual basis. But my experience with other funders has been that organizations are invited to apply for operating funding after they have a demonstrated track record of receiving project grants in the past. And so, there could be an option of applying for either or, but having that operating category be earmarked for applicants that have an application history. And I will
nonprofit history of doing similar operations for a minimum of 2 years.
Yes. And I would also just say, I feel really strongly that having an operating stream is really important. I would be sad to see that go, because I don't think that there's enough operating funding that exists out there. And it's invaluable for the sustainability and capacity of organizations to keep going. It makes me really proud that we have an operating stream, and I'd like to see that preserved.
I would agree. I don't think we necessarily need to lose the operating grant. I think that there are some caps that need to be put in place, and eligibility criteria. In my personal opinion, not to stay off topic, but I think that million-dollar organizations or multi-million-dollar organizations have no business applying for these types of operational grants when we're talking about a whole entire pool of money of like $100,000, $200,000, right? So that would be my thing, is really limiting if they have budgets over 100K or 250K or something like that, they're ineligible. That's it. And the total
And
amount you can apply for is also capped.
I've seen it done two ways. I've seen the operating funding being based on a max percentage. So you could apply, for example, for up to 30% of your revenues averaged over the last 3 years, but likely what you're awarded would be less than that, depending on what the capacity is of the fund. But given that the funds that we're working with, particularly right now, are quite small, a cap up to a certain amount of money would make sense.
I'm making notes.
I'm happy to come back to this and like offer more feedback about this at any point, based on the experiences that we've had with applying for these different funds through our organization too. So just offering that up.
And I'll apologize for advance. I just kind of jumped on the train there. I know we kind of went all over in one fell swoop, and I was a part of that. So I don't know if we want to go back to just project grants or just talk about all the streams holistically right now.
I think, for my thinking, we might benefit from a better definition of what is a small project. Like, what is a project? Okay.
Yes.
What is a project versus what is an event or festival? We ran into this last year with I forget which one it was, something.
Yes.
Like multi-day versus 1 day versus cultural organization versus I don't know what, okay? I mean, operating is operating, that we get, although I haven't read all the fine point here, but I think operating expenses versus operational capital is a whole other category that I think should be like defined. Personally, I don't think we should be providing money for operational capital. Okay, that's my opinion. I think we should be providing funding for operational expenses. Okay, and that should be clear. So we know what operations is. Okay. I don't know that it mentions, I need to read this again.
Well, I hate to say it, but looking at the green initiatives, I'm going back to this because I think it's a good example.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. It's a good example of what I think I'd like to see here in a more official formatted document. Again, like going back to this, it's broken out into purpose and policy and definitions. And they're not found within, it's at the beginning.
Yeah,
So I
actually,
think
that's right.
I think I'd like to structure this when it comes to it more like that once there's some alignment in how it's read. Where that makes sense. And then again, like we talk about this later, but again, there's a very clear outlined process for evaluating the proposals and applications. And then I don't love that the application form is attached to it, but that's a different problem for a different day. And then these would be, again, we talked about this before, but more plain language, different places and
Yeah.
whatever.
I mean, we know what seed funding is, although I think that if that's gonna be kept here, then it should speak to operational seed funding or capital seed funding or both. Cause they're very different things, as we all know. And then maybe in the case of the festival and event section, like those are to assert, they are defined. Because I don't see them as projects, but that doesn't mean you can't have grants under X dollars. Here's what you can apply for, right? So instead of calling it a project or a event or a whatever, although this does help us ensure these definitions or these, the way this is laid out does help us ensure that we are helping all types of initiatives, right? This helps us see, oh, we're doing some individual artist things, we're funding some larger project things, we're funding some community organizations to have either single day or multi-day festivals, right? Like we're seeing that we're using the money in different ways. But the other way to look at this is to say, you know, you can ask for money under up to a maximum of, I'm gonna throw a number out, please don't hold me to this, of $5,000 for these types of activities, blah, blah, blah. You can ask for money for these types of activities up to an amount, blah, blah, blah. You can have, you know, organizations we're funding operations for. That's a very specific type of organization. They are typically long-standing, some of them might be newer, but they operate on a multi-monthly, multi-seasonal, whatever calendar, right?
Mhm.
And then, you know, then you've got seed funding. I know I just threw a whole other idea into here, which I never thought about until we just started talking, which is why I love these conversations, because it makes your brain work. That's another just food for thought.
I'm gonna yes and you here, which is good. Just with respect to going, I know this is again holistically speaking, going back a little bit in conversation about different intakes for different streams. If we write it that way, I like that we're not comparing apples to oranges, like because whether or not we're trying to or not trying to, it's still happening when we look at the applications and see who's ranked first in each category, and then you see the range and things. It's still happening, even though we're getting very good at not doing that. I guess my question is, can we just write it in the guidelines that we can provide a certain dollar amount for those areas, like we talked about? If it happens to be 85,000 for operating, in the event that this money isn't, or that these funds aren't put here, they will get dumped over here. Can we put them back in, or they may be considered for the larger group? As long as that piece is in there,
Still keep your flexibility.
exactly, and that's giving us, I hate to say giving the committee the maximum control, but that's the best part about this committee, is being able to help make those decisions for the community, right? So instead of, the biggest concern in the past was if we allocated 50,000 to large projects and they weren't fulfilled, the way that it currently stands is that it would just disappear by the end of the year. So yeah, I think that, so sorry, going back around, like I'm starting to like this more. Which I think
I
is,
like that as well. My only concern would be what order the intakes go and what order of the city calendar, because then what you're gonna wind up with is what happens in healthcare, for example, every March is everyone's desperately
Yeah.
trying to spend money.
Yeah.
Right? Like you have
Oh, Lee, that doesn't happen. Oh,
yeah,
come
we have
on.
we give the hospital 5 million a year in for equipment and 3 million in the request coming in March. Right? Like that's the way. It's terrible, but I would foresee possibly something like that happening to you, where it's like, okay, we get picky at the beginning of the year. We only award certain funds, we roll over, and then all of a sudden we're ending the city's fiscal year and we're trying to award $80,000 in funds to $30,000 worth of small projects. Like, not saying that necessarily will happen, but I think that we need to think about that in how we write that and how we order if we're doing segmented intakes of the streams, so that we know that the largest requests come in at the end and the small ones at the beginning, if that makes sense.
Miranda, did you want to weigh in here?
Yeah, sorry, I was getting excited about what Lee was saying. So here's an idea for your consideration, colleagues. What if we were to do the project intake first, and have a specific pot of funding for that, based on our past experience with funding requests for the projects? So I'm thinking about small and large projects in one intake. And then the operations intake happens a little bit later, and the max is based either on a cap or a percentage. And if it's a percentage, then it means that within the budget that we have, we can allocate up to that percentage, which makes the allocations a bit flexible. I've also seen funders and been the happy recipient of this a couple of times, where if they have money in their grant pot left at a certain point in the year, they go back and look at some of the projects, maybe who didn't get all of the funding, and ask if those initiatives would like a little bit of top-up funding. And that way, that funding gets spent. It gets spent on projects that have already been deemed to be worthy of funding, and it provides a little bit extra to make sure that those things happen in a good way.
To think about here. Can I throw another idea into the pot, please? And this would be relevant to the question you're going to ask about the timing of funding and if can we give out money in a calendar year that's for the following year, et cetera, or whatever. We could potentially consider funding operational requests for more than 1 year at a time under certain criteria. That would give organizations more, well, whatever the word is, like more reliability or more, you know, you're not wondering from year to year, will I get this? Can I spend this? Do I have this? Whatever. It's very efficient on everyone's time. It's efficient for the applicant. It's efficient for the scoring process and the awarding of the grant. But I don't know if we're allowed to do it. So if you would look into that, so at least we would know. Miranda, go ahead.
Building on that, there are multi-year operating competitions that exist. Typically, like in the programs that I have seen, applicants are invited to apply to the multi-year competition after they've received operating funding for a couple of years running. So we could work that in as a long-term goal, and it would give us an opportunity to gauge how this new system is working. And then 2 or 3 years from now, if we have the funding, and if we have a good system in place, we could look at moving to a multi-year operating system for some applicants. And I totally agree with you, Donna. I think if we could make that happen, that would be amazing. And it would just like take our capacity and ability to fund operating to the next level and really be there for the artists and organizations in the community in a great way.
Go ahead, Lee.
My one caveat with that would be, even if we were to look at it, I would want some sort of, I like the idea of them having applied and successfully gotten it in previous years being like an eligibility criteria almost. Yeah. I also would want to see to get that kind of funding, I'd want to see some sort of sustainability clause built in, and have like a diminishing, right? So say you're applying for 75% of the operating of this one project or 25% of this specific organizational cost, the next year it's 10, right? Like it's diminishes so that at the end of the year, it's like, okay, we're at the end of the time, they can sustain without us because we can't just be their perpetually operating funding organization.
I completely disagree with that. These organizations that are looking for operational funding are like, they need it perpetually. Like there's just no way to survive and give service to the community when you know we're all trying to you know with it's not the only source of funding for us, but and I'm saying this in a general, but also from my own personal experience. We are trying to make our services and what we're providing to the community at low cost as possible, right? So if I was to sell my tickets for market price, right? Great, right? But I'd be selling tickets for $100 a seat, not 40. Okay, and so this type of support helps organizations that are operating on a consistent basis for many years to be able to give that service back to the community and be able to afford it. So the diminishing thing, I think we have to recognize as a committee and as a city that organizations need support. There's a bunch of them that apply to us. They can't do it without. But to add a criteria to what we were just talking about, I know in my experience, when we've had multi-year grants, you don't get year 2 until you've given year 1's report. And if year 1's report has a problem, you ain't getting year 2. Okay, and that's in the contract, right? So there's ways of ensuring that, you know, you're not just, right, Miranda?
Yeah, we building on that. We get operating funding from the OAC for multi-year, both at first year it's a major application, like it's the full application. Second and third years it's a slightly simplified application that shows that we're doing the work that we said that we would and flags any issues so that we can have conversation with the grantors. But the amounts are not locked in. So if there's an issue, the funding can be decreased if there's a significant issue. In terms of the Canada Council, the multi-year funding, you're locked into the same amount over 4 years. But the caveat there is that you have to submit twice annual reports, and your funding's not released until you've done both of them and shown all of the documentation. So there are mechanisms in place that assure quality and standards, but the decreasing funding is not something that is standard practice among operating funders. I've seen that with like investments in startups, but I think those are different pots of funding than consistent operating funding.
Okay.
So I guess my main concern and confusion about this is not necessarily whether or not the organizations need it, it's whether or not ACAP is the right ongoing long-term source. And I think that's only a question that can be answered once we see how this other envelope that Alicia alluded to in past meetings regarding all of the heritage ongoing funding is integrated, because that's all operating funding. Like if that's the case, then building a long-term multi-year operational funding strategy that then after, say they apply and get 2 operating grants year after year, and then they do a multi-year after that, and they still have a successful report, well, then we have to petition the city to basically say, okay, ACAP is no longer the place for these people to have long-term funding. ACAP, it needs to be its own operating envelope, just like the Bush Plane, just like the museum, just like whatever. It's now city operated arts or heritage. I just, that's my only concern is we're talking about such a small envelope of money. We have an advocacy role, but we also have like a duty to kind of make sure that those funds aren't just gobbled up by a few key organizations, which is honestly a primary worry if all of the other heritage organizations become a part of this funding envelope.
Really do love what you're saying. I love the idea of like sustainability and just as I have this conversation about sustainability and year-over-year funding operation requests. I think you're right. I don't think that it lands here, but I think that it's still a need that needs to be addressed. I just don't know how to get it done yet. So I think we're on the right track by setting us up and then propelling a case forward for at some point for review by council and to talk about what we recommend if we're making recommendations of others.
May come out, and I'd have to go back and read it because I haven't read it for a while, but it may come out, or it may be already out in the current cultural plan, or it may come out in an updated cultural plan that look at funding arts in a slightly tweaked way or different way. I don't know what the recommendations were originally, but those are documents we can refer to because those are the plans that the leadership and council and mayor look at that help them make their decisions, right? If the experts and a community plan has been put together and it says this is kind of thing we should be doing, and it gets approved by them, then that's the way forward, if you will, right? We know that's what they're. All right. You feel like we made, it is 1:15, so I do feel, Alicia, do you feel like we've made any progress today?
I feel like we have. Do you think that we could, do we have like 5 more minutes?
I do. I was worried about you
Okay.
getting down, okay.
Okay, no, it's just a call and it'll be okay. I was gonna say that, okay, so here's the thing, I wanna move on to seed funding. I think it's really important, but is this something that fits within this fund? We've only had one person or one individual application successfully access these funds since the whole of ACAP started. I think it's really important and really exciting. I think that as an individual applicant that received it last time, sorry, as with a new startup, I think it's really important, very good. I think they received somewhere between $8,000 and $9,000 for their work. And for the work that's going to take place. I don't know if that's appropriate, if it's not appropriate. I know this is proportional funding to the budget that they project, which can't be verified because it's projected. It's not, again, without any long-term history to go by. Should we, if we're going to keep this, should we cap it? Or should we just ask them that seed funding goes underneath? Should it go under small projects?
Go ahead, Lee.
I feel like Miranda had her digital hand up too first. But I was just thinking, why couldn't seed funding just be an additional line item under each of the other streams, right? Like essentially we're asking for a history of produced results, and then we could just say seed funding may be considered. Please reach out directly to city staffer to proceed with this. So essentially eliminate this whole massive section for the one applicant that's ever applied and still make it a possibility for those kind of game-changing plans that may happen in the future.
Miranda?
Yeah, just say under the eligible projects in both the small project and the large project that seed funding is an eligible cost. Because then depending on the amount that they are looking for, they can still ask for it and it's still obviously encouraged, but it's not its own project stream or like it's not its own grant stream. And I don't know that seed funding would apply to operating because again, that's a different class.
Yeah, I don't know where you would have seed funding in a small project. Or frankly, by the definition of the term, and maybe we park this and these are good things to think about for sure. It's just how is a project really seed funding, right? If you're doing something that is defined as a project, so to your point about defining certain things better, you know, versus a cultural celebration that might be planned to have year to year to year to year, and in year one, you have to purchase certain things in order to pull off that celebration, but you can reuse them again in subsequent years versus project. I don't know. But I would like to see us define with regards to seed funding, actually, and I in operational as well, and I will reread these things again. But I think it's very important to either allow capital or not allow capital. Like it should be very clearly stated. Either we fund capital seed, we don't fund capital seed, or we fund capital in operations or not. I personally don't think, inherent in seed funding inherent in the word seed funding is capital potentially, right? But we should just say.
Oh, I didn't equate seed funding with capital at all, but I agree with never funding capital. I think seed funding can be, hey, someone wants to start up this amazing organization or project, but they can't take the risk of leaving their minimum wage job or what have you to do it.
Right.
That's more where my brain was at with the seed funding, but I agree on the spectrum of let's remove capital. Like I don't think this fund is meant to, no offense, buy heating equipment or renovate a room somewhere. I don't think that's in the spirit of ACAP.
And when it comes to arts, you know, if not to get in too much in nitty gritty, but you know, like what is considered capital when it comes to buying a piece of equipment that you use to make art, right? Let's say, for example, somebody was to try and get assistance from us to start glass blowing, or other types of work that requires equipment that is still art, you know, it's certainly arts related. So it's just, you know, like I just want to define it. That's all.
Right.
Be clear.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think for me, I was just equating projects with a kind of seeding of an idea. But capital, as far as I've seen it, is always a separate funding category. And so it makes sense to be exclusive around that.
Yes.
And other pots of money, other streams, not our streams, but other streams are more like Trillium, for example, is a good source for capital funding, right? Provincial, but right,
Yeah.
or FedNor or Heritage Fund or whatever. Those tend to be the organizations that will fund capital, and have the capacity to properly adjudicate them as well, right?
Yeah.
In terms of the due diligence and blah, 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 all that kind of stuff, and agreements and who owns it if you go bankrupt, and it's all, right? They get complicated.
They will also have good working definitions that can help to inform the stances that we take for or against those things too. So
good idea.
Yeah, I think providing some definitions, just for notating, Alicia, some definitions between artistic tools versus capital would be helpful.
Yes.
Somewhere in this application.
For sure.
And then explicitly stating we don't fund capital.
The OAC has also taken a stand in many of the programs against that too. So that might be another good place to look for definitions.
Yes. Sorry. Next page. Sorry, not to push us too far forward. I would love to remove the category that says eligible expenses for operating grants. I think that that's just kind of verbiage that kind of is implied when we say what is not, which is probably a smaller category of things that you should not fund using that, so I'd like to just, so on page 6 at the bottom, and then notes to applicants. I feel that this is not useful because it's information that could be put elsewhere. So it's information that should stay, but not right here. So again, looking at, like, for example, operating assistance grants may not exceed a maximum of 25% of the applicant's projected operating budget. That's great. That's actually something that's typically captured underneath the heading, but for some reason hasn't been here. So it's just information I'd like to just move around a little bit and not immediately remove. Please contact city staff prior to submitting a seed funding application. We've already said that about all the applications, so that can come out too. That kind of stuff. So it's just about getting rid of some verbiage that's just kind of cluttery.
Can we go back to the eligible expenses for operating grants? Like, I'm sorry, did you say remove it, or did you say?
I would like to remove this.
It's very common, like, to say, like, what categories fall within what we will fund, right? Like,
yes.
Wages versus we don't fund marketing, we don't fund, whatever, like that's, so. Well, this, we do fund marketing, but you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't, you'd have to have some type of definition like that, wouldn't you? Unless you're gonna fund anything that's an expense, any type of expense.
I think we capture what is ineligible, because I think it's
that's fine. That's fine.
But yes,
that's fine.
But like keep
one or the other.
Yeah, more or less. I think it's a shorter list and it might be just more concise.
Yeah.
But that being said, those conversations and those questions do come to like city support. So either way, yeah, I want to just make this more concise. The note to applicants on page 6 at the bottom. And like,
can we revisit too? I know you gotta go, but I'm thinking for next conversation, so because we're almost through the guidelines to a degree, I would like to discuss possibly an organizational annual budget cap for operational grant applications. It really does bother me when multi-million-dollar organizations apply. It's one thing if they are a partner or a venue or what have you for a small project or a large project grant, but I don't think, at a certain point, this their scope, their size is beyond what the purpose of ACAP is for.
Okay, you made a note about that? Because I think it's something that we definitely should talk about. How do you feel about organizations that receive operating funding that also receive are the beneficiaries of grant money received by other applicants?
I have feelings. I have
Can you
feelings.
articulate those in a very short period of time?
I'm just.
In 1 minute,
If it's okay with, no, if it's okay with you, I'm just gonna send a quick email and I'm going to push my meeting back. If
are
that's
you
okay
sure?
with you. If you're available to
I'm
stay,
okay.
I
I'm
think
okay.
we're doing great and I want to keep going.
Okay, wonderful. Okay.
Can
Um, I do have issue to a degree with that. And I don't think this intake, it was quite as evident, but there was one round of intake where there was approved operational funding and multiple, if you added it up, it was close to 50 or $60,000 was essentially ultimately going to specific organizations. Um, and I don't know if that's the spirit of the grant. And I think that's just a bigger discussion item to have, is just, okay, if we're trying to distribute these funds as elegantly as possible across multiple forms of art, multiple forms of heritage, supporting all these cultural diversity and visible minority and LGBTQ2SI, like we have a lot of big important work to do. Like I like to say, like a lot of what we decide is some of the heart and the soul of the community. It's not to just put 50%, 30% of the funding towards one specific organization. So I do have issue with that to a degree, and I don't know how to solve that though, is I think the other issue.
Want to weigh in on that, Miranda?
I don't have more to add to what Lee has already said. But I can understand why it's an identified concern.
So I think that I've thought a lot, I've thought about this in the last little bit. It's a concern to me, and I think we don't need to, I think it's something that how we're gonna solve it is we're gonna talk about it, right? We're gonna identify it as something that we've seen, and we're going to, discuss and see if there's something that we should be, if there's a different way that we should be handling that. And because I think, exactly what you said, Lee, in terms of the amount of money cumulatively that is potentially being going from this fund, and it's supporting the same organization but in multiple ways. It's and we have very limited budget, so we'll just leave that at that. May I bring up one more thing while we're here? This has to do with, and it's because it's not on our original list. And Alicia, I know you want to simplify the applicant must sections, and yes, the applicant must sections, I think is the thing there. I think that, so I think that like, do we have, because we have two set, you can either be incorporated not-for-profit, or you can be a not-for-profit, or just a community organization that has, right? So I think we should just like try and spell that out maybe into a different kind of a box, because, and my comment has to go towards boards. So this talks about the applicant must have an independent volunteer board of directors, but lots of community organizations don't have volunteer boards of directors. They might have a little committee that meets to talk, right? So I think that we should really clarify the wording there, and ask for what we want, right? If I look in the festival and event grants, it does say incorporated not-for-profit applicants must have an independent volunteer board of directors, but what about committees? Like, what about, there's lots of, they're not incorporated, so what do they have to have? But also, my terminology here is governance best practice, and I think this is extremely important. It is very difficult in a small community like ours, don't get me wrong, okay? However, and it's an arbitrary consideration, but there are things that any governance expert would tell you are very important to live by, especially it's really the incorporated ones that you can really have any control of, but even in the others. So for example, non-related people on boards, okay? Sometimes what we end up with in smaller groups or it's just considered to be, I know, I can tell you, even from a liability perspective, right? I've filled out, I'm sure you guys have too, I've filled out insurance applications, and point blank, you are asked, are any of the members of the board of directors related to each other? Okay, and I can tell you that if they are, that is not a good thing, and you will be told you need to operate differently. And so whatever governance best practice might mean, I think it's just really important that we are working with professional organizations where they are operating under best practice when it comes to governance. I just wanted to throw that into the mix of all the things
It's so important, guys. It cut, no, sorry, that one has come up before. I'm thinking of some applications that we haven't approved in the past, whether or not that was part of the conversation at the time. But I've also noticed that at times with some smaller groups in particular. That's all.
Yeah.
I have feelings when it comes to like donor dollars, or in this case, taxpayer dollars, and that is to be extremely financially responsible with them. And I don't think it's responsible to give, for example, operating dollars to unregistered, unincorporated nonprofit. I think that the audit process that is required for registered nonprofits is essential. And it creates a degree of fiduciary responsibility on the not-for-profit to ensure that continued. And I would even, I mean, on some of the edited documents that I sent you, Alicia, I put right in the checklist that when it comes to providing these operating dollars, before we even see it as a committee, I think it's due diligence for you to go in and check their last fiscal year, their last 2 fiscal years on CRA, ensure that they still have their charitable status, ensure that they weren't operating on a deficit budget and we're not putting that money at risk. I think those are automatic exclusion criteria if they fail any of those. Like, I don't need to see their audited financial statements. That is not necessary for me. I need to know that you've done the due diligence to make sure that they even qualify for this grant. And if they don't, I don't want to see their application. And that's harsh sounding, but to me, that is the threshold that I operate from due diligence on money that's not mine, if
Yes.
that makes sense.
It does. I don't mind seeing that going back into staff hands. That means that's fine. That's not at all a concern. I want to just draw, in case there is anybody watching today, I just want to draw our attention to page 5 under operational assistance. Blah blah blah. The application must be an established incorporated not-for-profit. Turning the page over onto early page 6. You must have been in existence for at least 2 years, providing regularly scheduled artistic and cultural programming. So there are some pieces there. Should that be longer? I feel like the number 4 years has been thrown around in the past. Is it something that was this committee that I've been part of, or is this a different conversation? Or a different regulation that I've read from different communities that require people to, or organizations to be in existence for 4 years before they're considered for operational funding? I'll leave that because I don't think that you can reach into the recesses of my brain for that one. But
No, I put in my documents at least 3. I know 4 would be in the hypothetical of they've asked for recurring like 2 years, and then they've now gotten a multi-year, so that would be an additional 2 year. like that would be four, but I think like two or three at the bare minimum is where
Yeah.
my gut is landing.
I don't
I
want
don't know if
to,
there's other best practices that you guys are familiar with.
I think the OAC says 2, but I would have to double check that.
I think 4 is really pushing it a bit, like
Okay.
it's
it's a long time.
it is a long time, and it's hard to get to 4 without support.
Right. Well, and that's, I don't want to make it harder for people
Yeah.
who are starting up and getting there.
Yeah,
At the same time, I was gonna say, I don't know, for,
I mean, it can take a year to get your not-for-profit status, right?
yes.
So,
Okay, I'm happy to review these notes as well and look at the 2 and 3 year term. We can talk about that further. I just want to make sure that wasn't something, I'm confident I've read this, maybe it was on the City of Windsor's website. Reviewing their grant process, that some other communities ask for a larger, longer term standing in the community, and that's totally fine to not do that here. We can move on to festival and events grants. I guess those would fall under project grants, and we could spell that out specifically, without all the details here. Under those other headings, if that's what we decided, right? Or did we not?
well,
I'm
I
having
think
one.
that we said it's an option, but I'm not sure that we decided it.
Okay,
Am I wrong about that? Did we decide that? Or we said it's an option for
I
something
think
to think about?
we talked about how that might be a clean option would be
Okay.
to combine them, but we'd have to define clearly what
And
is a
the
project versus.
definitions are, yeah.
thank you for reminding me. I know that we've talked a lot, we covered a lot of ground in this meeting. Great, okay, perfect. If that's okay, then we can move on past the festival events and major cultural celebrations and community events grants, because
Right,
they'll be
And-
seen elsewhere.
right, but then we're at the end of the fourth.
Oh, no, we're not. Oh, we just have more and more pages.
Oh, I only have the first group here. Okay, keep
I'm
going.
so
That's
sorry.
all right. I have a virtual copy. It's
Okay.
fine. It's fine.
Sorry about
It's
that.
fine, fine.
Okay, so looking at this, we're looking at page 9. We've decided to remove cultural diversity grants. Generally here, and again, call them project grants and screen for that on the rubric when the time comes. Here we have at the bottom of page 9, ineligible expenses for all grant streams.
Sorry to interrupt you, Alicia. For the cultural diversity portion, could you mock up a version? Like, I'm guessing we don't committeize like every individual rubric element. Could you mock up what that rubric element would look like
Yes.
throughout this process? And that way we could provide any kind of feedback on how to integrate that and feel confident that we covered that well.
I think that's a great idea. Thank you for bringing that up. Yep. How do we feel about ineligible expenses? I like them. I think it's very clear cut. I don't know if this needs to be after every single funding stream or not, or should just be maybe on the front page. So if you're looking at it at that immediately, this is what you should stop looking for.
This does, I forgot that this was here. So this does say there is no capital for all streams, right? This isn't just about, I don't know why I wasn't paying attention to that before.
That's okay. No, I was gonna say, well, so just for reference sake, it says capital costs, which are the expenses incurred on the purchase of land, buildings, and construction. But that doesn't necessarily say, like, for example, we had a group last year that applied for an air filtration system.
Okay,
I think it may have been a or permanent installation.
right.
Is that capital? Like,
Well, that's
technically?
that becomes the question. That becomes the question, like what is,
Because it's not for this group. I can't remember which group it was, but they weren't buying a Cricut machine to do the things they needed to do to help with what they're moving forward with. It was to clear the air for the people so they could expand their programming. So we deemed that acceptable. Is this something? Yeah, I guess again, it's clear definitions.
maybe we can
Yeah, I
look
think
at,
it's just clarifying non-art related capital. What is that?
right,
And I mean, because our due diligence is not just at the arts community, although that's, I think, where our heart is for the most part, it's also to the heritage community. We have to define what is non-heritage related capital as well, because there's the potential that, okay, but I'm a heritage organization and there's this sculpture or piece that is essential to the heritage of this site. How, like, right? So I think we need to define that as well. not to overcomplicate your job, Alicia.
That's okay, just it's what it is.
And I'm sure that there are precedents that exist, and looking to things like Canadian Heritage, to the OAC, to NOHFC and FedNor, and some of the other funders that we've talked about might help to clarify what those margins are for us, because there can be some gray area even within definition, and the closest that we can get to a solid definition will be great.
That's wonderful. Thank you for leading me with the breadcrumbs. I appreciate that. I think we can move on to the next one. We'll come back to this and review this again in the future, but for now, we'll do some more thoughts here. I actually, there's in the last point on page 9 under ineligible expenses, equipment or expenses for personal use. I understand the relevance of including uniforms here, but costumes, because they come up with performance, they're not a uniform, they're a costume, and they go back into a generalized, I don't know, bay afterwards. Is this the same? Is it not the same? I've had this question come up a couple times. I have treated it as if uniforms are different for personal ongoing use, aside from and apart from this project moving forward.
That's how I would interpret it,
Okay,
but
okay, so there's no, we could define uniform later, it's fine. Yeah.
that's true too. Do you guys have a different opinion on that? And either of you?
I think that's fair. I think what would I'd like to see in something like this, because it's come up in some of the other committees I'm involved in too, and it's a very frustrating point of contention. And the example I'll give is, for example, some of the running groups, like I've been on Run the Great Lakes on and off for almost 15 years now. And so there's this amazing timing system that's available. And it would be great if it was set up in a way, or the city had some sort of role to play in making that a community use type timing system, because then all you have to do is buy the bibs. And I'd like to see something similar with, I know like you're very involved in theater, Donna, right? So you have like these amazing wireless microphone systems that some people have and some people don't. Costumes, same thing. Where is the community use kind of element, and where do they live in an operationalized way so that the community can continue to use them and it's not just a one-time thing? So maybe adding something about that, if they are only to be used for a single event and or a short-term project, please explain how this would be available to the community after, or something to that effect, where it's like, if there's not an ongoing use for this thing, how do we use these city funds to make sure that they're available for the community of artists or participants that would need them?
Yeah, it's something to.
It's a big document. Like it is what it is. It's just a lot.
Yeah, but the thing is, that, you know, to all these points, I know that they're, but it does make it more black and white.
Yes.
And it's just really clear, right?
Yeah.
I don't think we would, personally, I don't think we'd be in a situation, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't include it, right? Like I'm trying to think of any type of like those types of purchases, you know, they're way outside of what our budget would even cover, right? Because they're tens of thousands of dollars to buy things like that, but that doesn't mean that we should not include it, because we just don't think it could ever happen. It's just defining it. But to me, yes, a uniform is a personal thing that you wear to work in, not a costume that is for the purposes of presenting the art, whatever
Yes.
that is.
Exclusions. Moving on to page 10. Does anybody have any thoughts? Other than removing stacking, which is in this section.
Did we have any exclusions in our notes here? Other than stacking is in the notes. I'm just trying to think of.
Actually, so here's the issue with stacking. So what we want to keep here is stacking the way that it's written here. What we want to do is we want to remove stacking from the application forms. Here, I think it's, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. The 7th bullet point down, stacking of ACAP funding may be allowed with the Sault Ste. Marie Tourism Development Fund. However, the other municipal funding must not be used for the same expenses as ACAP funding. Budgets explicitly indicate how all municipal funding will be used. That stacking is fine. It has nothing to do with stacking streams. It's stacking with other funds that are available in the city.
Yeah, I mean, that isn't even stacking.
No, it's not. I just hate that they've done stacking. I just hate the verbiage.
Like I'm not even sure why that's in there.
Same.
You
I-
might even be able to just take it out. I
Okay.
mean, that's an exclusion, but what I think is more important about the tourism fund is that we're encouraging leveraging of partnerships to grow your pot of support, right?
Yes.
That's really what, to me, that's what's important about that, but I don't think that even needs to
Okay.
exist.
Going back up to the top, the organization receives direct ongoing annual municipal funding. This at this time only occurs with 3 different arts and culture based organizations, which we're all already aware of. I would like to spell this out because it doesn't mention in-kind services, which also is a concern here. If people apply for organizations apply for in-kind services, they're not eligible to apply for ACAP if they're approved, which is again, those timelines are, as we were talking about the timeline for intake, it's also challenging because we know that those applications have to be in by September 1st for consideration in the year's next budget. And they currently do come to me now. But they, again, like they have to be provided for November for review to council. So in terms of something that's a piece to think about. I don't think there's too many organizations out there that are applying for in-kind funding and also looking to apply for ACAP funds, but potentially those could be possible. So I guess the question becomes, how do we make sure when we're looking at the timing of intakes, if we are going to move to a system of multiple intakes by stream, which one, again, talking about which one goes first and what's the appropriate timeline so that they have time to apply if they are rejected from budget, if that makes sense, for in-kind services.
So just for clarity, if you apply for in-kind services such as like barricades and garbage disposal for a concert,
Yes,
that would exclude you from being able to apply for funding to pay the musicians for said concert?
yes, because it's technically cultural funding as a whole. It's from the same pot, sort of.
Why would
Sort
we
of.
do that?
I don't know. I don't know.
I would personally, I would question that.
Yeah, that doesn't make any
Why
sense
would
to
we
me at all.
exclude-
Why would
why would-
in-kind exclude you?
Happy to explore it further.
I mean, obviously, if you got in-kind support and then you're asking for money to pay for something that you're getting in kind, well, yeah, hello. But
I don't know if it's to leverage capacity across the sector to be able to provide the most support to as many people as possible or many organizations as possible. But in doing so, I was told that in-kind services are not eligible for this funding, though it's not specifically
maybe you
spelled
could
out
get
like
some
it's-
clarity on that.
Yeah, like I wouldn't want in-kind services don't need the funding, but the organization or project might need the funding and the support of in-kind services. Like these are usually largely volunteer driven. Like I'm thinking of some of the projects and that would happen. Yeah, that should
I'm
be like
thinking-
almost a default. Like I think that we should actually connect people that receive positive funding with the city department for in-kind services if we see the need.
Yes. Yeah. Unfortunately, that intake happens once a year, and again, they're due by September 1st. So it's making sure people are in alignment and in the know. That was something that was brought up at the cultural forum back in February. And so I was happy to see that there were a lot of people that didn't know about that avenue as well. So that's a conversation that we're gonna have ongoing, and anyway, we'll talk about that another time. But okay. So we've talked about organization.
Miranda's had her hand up for a long time.
I'm
Sorry,
so sorry.
I'm her digital advocate.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lee. Question about something I thought I heard Alicia say. So you were musing on the idea of moving ineligible expenses for all grant streams up to like the cover page of these guidelines. If you do that, I would advocate for exclusions for all grant streams to be moved up there too, so that some of these points, particularly the ones around receiving funding from government sources would be there, and they would be used as exclusionary criteria from the get-go when screening applications. We've all, I think, been surprised or kind of miffed by things that exist in these guidelines that are really easy to overlook because the document is so lengthy and because things are sort of buried, not intentionally, in some of these other sections. So just having those things really clearly defined at the get-go, I think, would be very helpful.
Um,
I'm gonna have to scoot by at 2.
okay, I've got about 5 more minutes.
Okay,
before I
okay,
shut it down.
so we're all in the same boat. All
But
right,
I think we're okay here. Looking at the rest of the section, I don't have any other further concerns with it. I think it again needs some change to the language to make it more accessible. Lee, do you have a thought?
I have so many.
Sorry.
I sent them over to you in that document I sent yesterday, and sorry it was so late. I know you didn't have time to probably even review it, let alone integrate anything. But it was just the time I had for it. So my thoughts were really expanding on incomplete applications, including any proxy documentation missing. So if you're an incorporated non-for-profit, if there's no board of directors listing, if the project timeline's incomplete, if the financial statements are not supplied, if the financial spreadsheet is not complete and clear, like the number of spreadsheets I've reviewed that I'm like, what even is this? If there's no quotes or estimates for items in excess of a certain threshold, like say over $1,000 or $2,500, something to that effect. Missing fields, dates, and locations. I mean, that can be solved with a very simple digital form that can essentially like not let somebody press the submit button if those fields are missing. Make it a required field. That's it.
I think if it's okay with you, I think this is a conversation for the committee as a whole, but I do want to take it into a form. I think that a Google form would probably deal with the best things possible. The issue being the link to the website. So if I don't know in between, just from again, like from a cost perspective, what the best move here is, because I can make the things and have it available and I can send it out to people directly, but I won't be able to post it on the city website. So the question becomes, do we want to make people actually contact me immediately? And do I have an out of office on all the time saying, if you contacted me about this, and then they instantly get shot that form. So if I'm not here, if I miss it, I'm fine with that. Like, or if it's, or do they send it to the arts and culture, if you're about this, blah, 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 and then it's just there and it's available to them at all times. I'm not sure. So that's kind of a process piece, but I agree with you. And I would really like to see this be done, not the way it's being done. And I have so many thoughts and feelings also. And this has been, like you said previously, like this has been just a horrendous round. And I don't know what has happened with the applications. They are as they were posted in the same, but something has happened. And I don't know if it's an update to Adobe that other people have or haven't accessed, or if it's us in some way, but things have not gone well with our intake forms, making it more cumbersome for everybody.
Reaching like word length as well. I've seen that very consistently. It's like that they just regurgitate whatever ChatGPT spit out, and it's yeah. So I just maybe having like what an incomplete application is, and it's like it's all of these things. If you don't checkbox all of these things, we're not even going to look at it.
Yeah.
Actually, in some grants, they have that. Don't know which one I'm thinking of right now, but there's an actual checklist at the end of it, and it says you have included X and Y and Z and A and B and C and whatever, and you have to tick, 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 tick.
I know HFC is like that for their internship.
Oh,
Maybe
yeah. I don't know. I've done so many. I just want to, before we run out of time, I just want to jump in and say something, because you just made me think of something, Lee. And that is, if we were to move intakes, and I think this could be a very big problem potentially, but if we were to move intakes to January, we are going to have people who will have 2-year-old financial statements. And if we think current year financial statements or most recent year financial statements are important, then usually a January timeline for sending in applications is not going to work well with that. Because most organizations will not have an audited financial statement or even just a note to reader statement 1 month after their year end. So let's just make a note of that and think about it if we can work around it.
maybe I'm wrong, but I thought most organizations didn't have fiscal years aligned with calendar years. I know some do.
I don't
Um,
know, Alicia might be able to look at that. I know everything I've ever done is all calendar year. I
Okay.
think most people are calendar year. I think when it comes to these smaller groups and I mean, project things, we're not looking, but even a lot, I think a lot is calendar year versus whatever, April to March, but maybe I'm wrong. I could very well be wrong. Just something we should know.
Yeah, I'm curious about the trends. Maybe Miranda can chime in here because I know like healthcare, for example, is always April through March. Education is almost always
Has that aligned?
September.
Lee, that's because those align with the budget calendar for the province, right? And so those budgets are aligned with the same as the funding.
I'm gonna pop in here with, this is a little bit anecdotal, but I've been on boards before that have different calendar years versus fiscal years and what have you. Ending at the end of June in particular, and it's because of typically the free services they access from their bookkeepers and their auditors.
Well, there's that too. Yeah, that's true.
But
I know we do, that's why if we, as an example, if we get our stuff to our auditor in January, he'll turn it around. Otherwise, do not talk to them
Yeah.
until May.
Yes.
Just don't, right? And that's fair because they're helping us out by
Yes.
providing us with preferred pricing. Miranda?
I mean, our fiscal year is October to September. So, and that was a choice that was made based on our typical programming calendar and our programming flow. And I know other community arts organizations who have adopted a similar perspective, but to our advantage, it does work well for audits and such.
Right.
a lot of fun. A lot of things to follow up on here. I think we're out of time, as much as I'd like to keep going. But just before we get into it into details, does the assessment criteria stay as it is, or like, with the addition of the diversity?
The diversity?
Or do we make this smaller? Do we just list what it is and then link to the rubrics directly so that information is replicated the way that we want it seen? And say these are the major headings, but again, the information is also available over here on this different space. And then we have the availability to change the rubric as required and it doesn't get approved by council in the same way, or is that possible? I don't know. Because technically here they're just listed. I don't know that the rubrics did not go to council. They didn't. Like, I know that they were instituted in June of 2022 at some before I left for leave. So with that in mind, I know that they, again, like, they're linked here and they've been updated, but they don't necessarily go within this document to council, so to speak, unless you'd like them to.
I'd appreciate the opportunity to get my head into that a little more. Or does anyone have anything they'd like to add or edit?
Yeah, could we review the assessment criteria in the rubric maybe next meeting? That and finalize the exclusion criteria. I actually have a whole another 7 or 8 points of exclusion criteria. And I know that makes me sound like a monster, but it's just to simplify the process and make it a little bit more black and white. But I'm wondering if we could leave off here and revisit assessment criteria, rubric, and exclusion criteria for next meeting.
And on that note, have we decided about next Wednesday?
No, we haven't. I haven't had a chance to look at the calendar yet.
Okay, no, it's okay. So I just wondered. So Alicia, you'll follow up to schedule our next meeting on this conversation, okay? And then also to either confirm or reschedule the meeting we currently have in our calendars for May 21st. In order to, the goal is to complete, if we can, and if we can get everyone in the room, the goal is to complete the adjudication of the grants during the next meeting.
Yeah, for sure. Great. I'm gonna take a note that we left off here.
Yes, please do that.
But yes.
All right, if there's nothing further, could I have someone to move into second adjournment of this meeting? Thank you, Miranda. Thank you, Lee. All in favor. Have a nice Thursday. See you next time.
Thank you all
Thank-
for your brains. This was really, really valuable.